deciphering handwritings and that stuff. I just couldn't
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. As we start this event, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Dr. Daniel W. Rahn, the President of the Medical College of Georgia and the Senior Vice Chancellor for Health and Medical Programs for the University System of Georgia. Dr. Rahn.
Thank you, Joseph. I'd just like to begin by thanking Joe for everything that you've done to try to pull this together. Really appreciate it. We all appreciate your efforts. And I'd like to express my appreciation to the members of the MCG community who are here today, the public, family members, friends, colleagues of Dr. Haynes who have gathered today to celebrate the opening of the Curtis G. Haynes Sr. M.D. exhibit and manuscript collection here at the Greenblatt Library. This really is the kind of event that is really enjoyable, and one of the privileges of being the president of an institution like MCG is to participate in events like this. Since Dr. Hobbs first shared the news of the gift the Haynes family's made to MCG, the personal and professional papers of Dr. Curtis Haynes Sr., I've spent a lot of time thinking about the idea of a life's work. More specifically, the very noble act of dedicating your life to service and to the care of others. The English philosopher Thomas Carlyle is credited as the author of a Latin saying that hangs in the Georgia Capitol. I see it often these days, more often than I'd like, quite frankly. It reads, "Sic vo non vobis." That liberally translated is, not for ourselves, but for others. And in the Capitol, it's intended to guide the thinking and actions of our elected officials. In his famous treatise, Sartor Resartus, Carlyle believed that it is the duty of man to do good works. Taking another quote from that treatise, he said, do the duty which lies nearest to you. The second duty will then become clearer. What a world we would have if everyone simply followed that advice. Well, Dr. Haynes did that. He did just that. He graduated from MCG School of Medicine in 1944. He spent his lifetime in practice in his town, in his rural hometown of Claxton, Georgia, doing good work for the benefit of those closest to him. Probably made greater contributions to society than fruitcake. He improved health care to individual patients. He saw as many as 50 patients a day, and he contributed to better health for all by conducting important research that quite simply revolutionized the care of patients with cardiovascular disease. In many ways, this event is a homecoming. For while Dr. Haynes is no longer with us, the record of his life's work has found its way home to the institution where Dr. Haynes began his medical education and his professional journey as a young man in the 1940s. So today, we celebrate the work of Dr. Haynes, his commitment to his patients, to his community, to the colleagues who work so closely with him on his important research, to his profession, to those who come behind him by making the record of his life's work available to the public through the official opening of this exhibit and manuscript collection. This exhibit celebrates the life and achievement of Dr. Haynes as a physician, a scholar, and a humanitarian. The collection consists of personal and professional papers, including his personal and professional correspondence, journal articles, research data, logbooks on the Evans County Heart Study, heart and genealogical research notes, photographs, and slides related to Dr. Haynes' research, award and certificates presented to Dr. Haynes, and recordings of individuals who were interviewed about their personal and professional relationships with Dr. Haynes. It's a record of a life's work indeed. So to Dr. Haynes' family, I want to offer my sincere gratitude. You honor the Medical College of Georgia by entrusting us with this important piece of history. And I thank you.
Dr. Douglas Miller, the Dean of the School of Medicine.
Thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here and to also participate in thanking the Haynes family and guests for being here. On behalf of the School of Medicine, we're very pleased that you're all able to gather today to honor someone who has honored the Medical College of Georgia School of Medicine. It's certainly important to recognize the work that Dr. Hobbs has done to help organize the important historic papers that Dr. Haynes has left to the college, and I want to acknowledge that at this time as well. And it's also important to recognize that the family medicine roots that Dr. Haynes has in practice here in Claxton and having trained here at MCG are a big part of what the School of Medicine is very proud of. Our family medicine department does very strong work in the training of residents and the provision of excellent care, and also participates in very important community-based research that advances the health of all Georgians across the entire state of Georgia. So we're very pleased that they're one of the prototype academic departments in the School of Medicine. As a cardiologist, I am familiar with Dr. Haynes' work. I think we're fortunate at the Medical College of Georgia School of Medicine to have produced two of the finest cardiovascular epidemiologists in the last 50 years, Dr. Haynes and Dr. Bill Cannell. The Evans Heart Study was certainly one of the breakthrough studies, as was the Framingham Heart Study, and we have learned a great deal about the predilection of cardiovascular disease for certain groups of people living in various parts of the country as a result of these two landmark studies. I'm also a member of the Paul Dudley White Society. I'm very pleased that Paul Dudley White, who was one of the best cardiologists probably to ever practice in this country when he was at the Public Health Service at the NIH, was able to support Dr. Haynes' first grant and to find a way to make it the first NIH-funded grant to study the epidemiology of any illness, let alone cardiac disease, in this country. So we're really very appreciative of all the good work that Dr. Haynes did during his life, the legacy that he has provided to this school today, and an ability to actually practice cardiovascular medicine today in a much more informed manner, using the evidence that he provided from one of the perhaps premier and best designed studies of cardiovascular epidemiology and health ever carried out in this country. So it's my great pleasure to be here and to once again thank the Haynes family for all of their wonderful work and their support of this project. Thank you.
Dr. Spurker.
Good afternoon. This is a slight change in the program. Dr. Goldstein is regrettably unable to attend, but he, again, extends his sincerest regrets. I'm Roman Saburka, Vice President of Instruction for the institution. Contributions of scholars' collections such as this are invaluable to the tripartite mission of education, research, and clinical care for the Medical College of Georgia, as well as the breadth of its institutional archival holdings. The Greenblatt holdings are visited by hundreds of MCG students, faculty, and guests annually. The archives have been consulted by national programming such as the History Channel, and most recently PBS in the remaking of American Medicine. The Haynes Collection is distinctive in many ways. It is now the second largest holding in this library, and as well as having full digital accessibility. The collection is uniquely aligned to the Medical College of Georgia's identified areas of thematic research, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. The subject and content areas are those we find in the newspaper headlines and news headlines every day, those being smoking and its impact on cardiovascular disease, socioeconomic status as it relates to morbidity and mortality in biracial populations, and the impact of genetics, stress, personality, exercise, and diet on cardiovascular disease. The value of this historical archive is a significant impact it will have as a foundation for future evidence-based science, which cornerstones the mission of Medical College of Georgia and how we serve the citizens of the state. Lastly, and on behalf of the academic enterprise, I thank the Haynes family for this generous contribution we will secure proudly in this archive. I'm certain the celebrated works of Dr. Haynes will transcend our borders through the advances our students, faculty, scholars, and guests achieve in education, research, and clinical care for all of society. Thank you very much.
Dr. James Osborne.
Dr. Hobbs, thanks a lot for inviting me here. This is a real privilege. I really appreciate being able to speak on behalf of the alumni and the foundation. And Dr. Haynes served on both those boards. He was a member of the foundation board for several years, and he was a member of the Alumni Association for a long, long time. He contributed not only with his money, but his time. Dr. Haynes was honored by the School of Medicine Alumni Association as its distinguished alumni in 1988, the most distinguished alumni during that year. In 1998, he was awarded with the President's Award for Outstanding Service to MCG. In 1997, the year before that, he was awarded, or he was honored with the establishment of the Curtis G. Haynes, M.D., Endowed Chair in Family Medicine. Now, that chair today is valued at $1 million. On a personal note, Curtis would come by my office occasionally. Almost every time he came up to see Dr. Tollison. And he'd come by my office and we'd talk about different things. It was he was just a down-to-earth person. He wanted to talk about how he could bring more people to MCG and bring more influence to MCG. And believe me, he had a lot of circles out there that he could do that. Sometimes we talk about family and how important that was. And he'd talk about his beautiful bride here, beautiful bride Betty, and she was always on his arm, and that means a lot to a man like so accomplished person like as he was. Each time I talked to him, though, I felt like he was such a genteel man and such a true friend, not just to me, but MCG. You know, the foundation's highest priority is stewardship. And this is the way I think of Dr. Haynes. Just consider for a moment in here that everybody in this room's got the same amount of time. Everybody on this earth has got the same amount of time. That's the president, that's the executive, that's the paper boy, that's the banker. Everybody's got 24 hours in the day. I'm telling you, the difference in people, though, isn't the amount of time available to them, but it's the manner in which they exercise their gifts and talents within that available time. When I think of Dr. Haynes, I think of him as a student, as a servant leader, whose purpose in life was stewardship. Good stewards are expected to realize the maximum possible return on the resources entrusted to them. When I think of Dr. Haynes, I always think also of a story in the Bible. It's in Matthew 25. Jesus was preparing his servants, his followers, to be servant leaders. He told of a parable about talents that really caught their attention. As you may know, this involved 3 servants, and he gave them a certain amount of money to hold and invest. And in those days, you know, the master, when they take a trip, it would last for a year or more. Upon his return, the master discovered that 2 of the servants had invested their money wisely, and 1 had buried it. When the servant who had buried the money began to offer excuses, the master refused to accept the excuses. Instead, he rebuked the lazy servant and punished him severely. In the meantime, the other servants who were dutiful and were investing all that time, received a lot of praise for their diligent labor. I think it's rare indeed to see a person like Dr. Haynes. He had so much of a positive effect on so many people in so many circles. Because of Dr. Haynes' influence, he brought a lot of people here to MCG. And I remember people who served on our boards during that time, people like Jerry Achenbach and Jack McConnell and Carl Reef. Now, it didn't hurt that some of those people were able to get on Augusta National when they came here, but Dr. Haynes had that influence too. But these were people who were heads of national firms and pharmaceutical firms, and they brought lots of influence here and lots of dollars too. He was always home with the poor and disadvantaged in South Georgia, but he also was at home with those people that I've just talked about, the CEOs, the bankers, the heads of corporations, and even kings and princes. But he was always just so proud to be called a country doctor. I don't know, he's a remarkable person, but he's one of those rare individuals who achieved all of his personal goals but never compromised his purpose in life. And because Dr. Haynes, I think, was so genuinely humble, I don't think he ever recognized how influential he was and esteemed by his fellow people, his fellow man. This included his patients and his friends and those corporate people, the heads of corporate peoples, and his professional colleagues, especially in the Foundation and Alumni Society. I just closing, my conclusion here is that I can honestly say that Dr. Curtis Haynes made the world a better place to be. Thank you.
As chair of the Department of Family Medicine, I had the distinct pleasure to be part of a group of MCG representatives that met with Dr. Haynes and Mrs. Haynes and other members of the family at their home for lunch in Claxton, where the discussions that began that day that now culminate in this event today. As I wandered around a large room filled with Dr. Haynes' artifacts for almost about an hour and a half, that's when I recognized the rich potential that existed in the historical gift that was being discussed by the family. Through many discussions and much work, we have arrived at this day where the life and work of Dr. Haynes will be appropriately honored in this historic place. In the Department of Family Medicine, there's a companion permanent display honoring the life and works of Dr. Haynes, which you are welcome to visit at the end of the ceremony. Transportation to that site will be provided in front of the library at the end of the ceremony and the reception. It joins displays honoring the Haynes Research Endowment, a fund provided by many grateful benefactors honoring Dr. Haynes to support the development of family medicine research in the Department of Family Medicine here at MCG. This endowment also supports, in cooperation with the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine, which is the National Organization of Family Medicine Faculty, an annual Outstanding Research Award to an individual whose research and research contributions mirror that of the vision provided by Dr. Haynes. This year's recipient for the award is Dr. Peter Frank from the University of California at Davis. Dr. Frank was notified of this award 2 weeks ago, and Mrs. Haynes, he will likely be in contact with you in the near future about that honor. Also, in our presence today, we are fortunate to have at least one other recipient of that award, Dr. Larry Green, the 1998 recipient of the Haynes Research Award. Larry? In preparation for this display, the department initiated a series of conversations with those who worked closely with Dr. Haynes over the years that will be permanently archived for future generations to study and appreciate. These conversations range from those who work with him on a day-by-day basis to those whose life and work intersected only at specific points in Dr. Haynes' life. A second phase attempt to understand the life of Dr. Haynes was made by requests to professional colleagues across the country to give their impressions of Dr. Haynes through written and oral reflection. Many of these comments were the simple congratulations for a well-deserved honor, and unfortunately are imprinted only in the minds of those of us who had the privilege to make those calls. However, for a number of these colleagues, their comments were prepared in a form that can be shared with each of us forever as they reflect on the significance of Dr. Haynes as the scholar, Dr. Haynes as the humanitarian, and Dr. Haynes as the physician. There is a unique similarity in each of their descriptions of this man that we honor today that suggests that he remained steadfast to his belief in science, humanity, and faith. And for those of you who knew some of these people, the colleagues who provided these insights consist of names like Peter Curtis, Larry A. Green, Raymond S. Greenberg, C. David Jenkins, Julian E. Kyle, Eric Lindblom, Ivan Zazansky, Joseph Tollison, and I added something too. We are also fortunate to have present today Dr. John Mcdonough, who, as a part of the Public Health Service and later of the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, together with Dr. Haynes, worked to establish the foundations of the Evans County Heart Study. Dr. Mcdonough. Dr. Mcdonough, along with MCG's own Glenn Garrison, who is also present today, and who also contributed to the oral history of Dr. Haynes, were the physicians who examined the entire original Evans County Heart Study cohort. Dr. Garrison? Now, of all those comments that we got back, there was always someone who kind of put something in summation that just kind of makes everything else just kind of fit into place. And those comments were received by us from Dr. Raymond S. Greenberg, MD, PhD, the president of the Medical University of South Carolina, who regrets that he cannot be here today. And this is what he wrote. I have already cited some of Dr. Haynes' attributes, such as his intellect, refined sense of observation, faith, and traditional values. In interacting with him, the most immediate impression always was his personal modesty and integrity. He walked in some of the highest circles of national and international medical research, but he never forgot where he came from. He was tied to the land and the people of rural Georgia, as well as to his English ancestry. It was, in fact, his understanding of his community that gave him the insight that drove his research. Few people ever have the blessing to know a community as deeply and as personally as Dr. Haynes knew Claxton's. Others express that kind of knowledge through writing or art, but for Dr. Haynes, the vehicle of his description of his community was epidemiological investigation. He was particularly impressed that someone who grew up in the days of racial segregation in the South could be such a champion for improving the health of all people, while some around him either turned a blind eye to the inequities or actually promoted them. He strove to help all of his patients regardless of race or economic station. Race was a fundamental theme of his work, but only in the context of understanding why some groups were more affected by certain diseases than others. The clear extrapolation of his work was to eliminate these disparities in health status, and in that context, he was literally decades ahead of his time, unquote. And finally, what if the Evans County Heart Study had never occurred, as well as all of the accolades associated with it? I strongly believe that we still would have been left with a convincing argument that the works of Dr. Curtis G. Haynes, Sr., as a physician, a citizen, a father, a husband, a friend, would have been more than sufficient for us to be in this place today. Thank you. Let me take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Larry A. Green, Professor, University of Colorado, Department of Family Medicine, Director, Prescription for Health, and Senior Scholar in Residence, the Robert Graham Center. Dr. Green.
Joey Shreed on Did you skip your time?
Oh, I did. I did. You know, he's only my previous chair. Well, let me back up. Let me take this opportunity to introduce to you Dr. Joseph W. Tolleson, Chair Emeritus, Medical College of Georgia, Department of Family Medicine, and currently the Senior Vice President, American Board of Family Medicine. Dr. Tolleson.
You rascal. I guess that eliminates my 3-minute limit, right?
Oh, no, it doesn't.
Well, I was blessed because I knew Curtis and Betty during the glory years, the golden years, and over 20 years, all the regular visits, so it was really, really, really special. So this is a day many of us have been waiting for quite a while, isn't it, Betty? Quite a while. It's an opportunity to celebrate the life and the work of such a wonderful man and wonderful family. I knew Curtis in such different ways. Revered colleague. I've seen the plates move under Africa more times than most, I can tell you, as he described it over and over. I knew him as a mentor, but I also knew him as a patient. And there are just so many stories and so little time, as Dr. Hobbs has told me. But all of us have heard when, as a teenager, he walked into the major Northeastern University and said, "Am I qualified to be a doctor?" Come on. Was he ever? Look at his career. Look at all of the gifts that Dr. Haynes gave to us. Then I could tell you the time when he had his heart attack, which thankfully he did very, very well after, but he showed up down in the Family Medicine Center one day with Betty. Thought that I might want to take him to the CCU. I said, "Yes, sir, I think that we might want to do that." So, but he did wonderful and went on to do many, many years after that of great, great work. A superior man with a superior mind, a gifted mind. But you know, when you're talking about Curtis, you also have to talk about the other of the dynamic duo, Jerry Achenbach. And I also was with Jerry, who many of you knew as the CEO of Piggly Wiggly. I knew him in a different way also, and they were such a team. Together they were more than one. They were more than two, weren't they, Betty? They were amazing. Jerry was a Wall Street financier and did remarkably well financially, but was not happy. So he went to an aptitude testing. They said, "You need to be with people, Mr. Achenbach. You need to be leading people. You're making all this money, but you need to be leading." So the next thing, he goes from New York to Vidalia, Georgia, where he's CEO of Piggly Wiggly, and of course he found his life's work there. Such an important person to the medical college, to Dr. Haynes, to all of us. He taught nationally in the American Management Association's President's Course, and he gave me a number of lessons in that course. In fact, a great deal of what I know about leadership and management I learned at the feet of Jerry Achenbach. So I think of Curtis Haynes and Jerry Achenbach as a team. Together, they were much more than either would have been on their own. And Curtis owed a great deal to Jerry, but Jerry owed a great deal to Curtis. Following that up a bit, Jerry gave a great deal of his resources to the MCG Foundation and formed the Haynes Endowment, as you heard earlier. Mr. Crockett and other members of his circle also contributed to that. And why did they do that? Because he had heard of Curtis and he had heard of the work he was doing, and Mr. Achenbach, being the astute businessman he was, had noted that a number of his employees in Piggly Wiggly were having premature vascular events, and he was worried. So vintage Curtis, he calls Dr. Haynes up, and they meet late one night at a service station somewhere between Vidalia and Claxton. This sounds so typical if you knew them. and they formulated a plan to go forward. And this plan resulted in so much more of Curtis's work and what was done. So I applaud Curtis immensely, as we all do. We're here to honor him today, but I also applaud his close friend, Jerry Achenbach, whom we also love, didn't we, Betty? Speaking of love, though, it's been mentioned earlier, but I've been closer to the flame for longer than some, and I can tell you that I know in this instance no one person, no one man was an island. And Betty Haynes deserves immense credit for the consistent support you gave, the advocacy you gave for your man, Betty. All the work over the years, you drove him places. And let's be honest, you were a city girl. What were you doing in the country anyway? Because you loved him. You were devoted to him, and you followed him, and you impacted his work in such wonderful ways. So all the future generations that are going to benefit, I say they benefit because of Curtis and because of you, Betty. The other thing I would like to mention is the Haines Award, which Dr. Hobbs alluded to earlier, that Dr. Green's one of the recipients. That's a very special award. Paul Fisher, when he was on our faculty in the early 80s, said we needed to do this. And what makes this so absolutely special is it is the top research award in our field nationally. Members of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine, members of NAPCRAG, North American Primary Care Research Group, which Dr. Green is such a prominent member, members of our National Membership Society, and members of the department select the outstanding researcher. If you go to the department afterwards, as Dr. Hobbs has invited, and I hope you will, because it's a marvelous, marvelous continuing display over there, you will see several things. One will be the list of the 22 awardees of the Haynes Award since 1985, one of whom is Dr. Green, has been noted. There are 21 others. This, believe me, reads like who's who in family medicine research. What a tribute to all, but certainly to Dr. Haynes. And the criteria of this is, as you would expect, and as was alluded to about Dr. Hobbs, is so important that we recognize that the future will go forward. And I hope you'll look at the award itself. I think it's beautiful. It was commissioned by a local artist, and it's called Discovery. And basically it represents in an impressionistic way the family and how the family, the integral role the family plays in our society. But 22 of those awards have been given. Dr. Green has one, and there are 21 others, and we're very, very, very proud of that. Weren't we blessed to have known Curtis Haynes, a man who has been noted by others here today that gave more of himself, expected less, and left the world much, much better than he found it. I personally was enriched and blessed by his presence, by his, although I will tell you, in all honesty, Curtis did not have a watch. I'm convinced he did not have a watch. Isn't that right, Kurt? And he would show up at any time, in any place. And those of you who knew him knew that was a fact. Right in the middle of patients, it doesn't matter. And we stopped everything because Curtis was the one. But we're here to honor him today because we know what his ultimate gift was. And so many people have been alluded to, worked hard. We're grateful to Dr. Hobbs and the department. But working down into where I'd like to recognize Kurt, because when several people have alluded today to the warehouse of materials, you had to see it. Dr. Haynes did not throw anything away. I see heads nodding. He threw nothing away. Kurt told me that he found the bill of sale for his grandmother's house in 1919. I mean, he had everything. So Kurt spent months, and so I give he and Edwina credit for sharing her husband with this legacy. because Kurt spent months going through that, assembling, cataloging, getting it in condition that the library here and the department here could work with this. So I really thank you, Kurt, for that contribution back to your dad and to your family. And locally, I'd like to thank Ms. Simons, Carla Simons, who I think really was a moving force in keeping this moving forward, and I really thank you, Carla, for what you did. And Ms. Plunkett, Pam, who always has had this long-term relationship for over 20 years with Betty, and they burn the phone up sometimes, I think. But I appreciate that because I think that's been the bridge from the medical college to the Haynes family in many instances. We want to thank you, Betty. We want to thank you for what you did for your husband. We want to thank the Haynes family, Kurt, Chris. I want to thank y'all for sharing your dad with this community. It's been something that we will never forget. We thank you for what he gave to family medicine. It is, after all, the research award in our field. A great man, and we all were blessed to know him. Thank you for allowing me that privilege.
Larry, I think I have it right now. And guess what? Dr. Tolson doesn't have a watch either.
When the invitation came to me in Denver, I immediately knew I wanted to be here today for two reasons. The first one was I wanted to be with Betty Haynes on this day. Now, when Dr. Joseph Hobbs sort of lost his grip and said I should say something here, and he gave me my time limit, and he wanted me to say something about practice-based research, and I told him that I just warned him. I said, I'm not planning on lecturing this crowd about practice-based research. What I want to do is tell them a story. So I'm going to tell you one of my very favorite Curtis Haynes stories, and I ask your indulgence. Let me just set this up a little bit. Now, first of all, I hadn't been born yet when he went into practice, okay? Did you hear that? So this is a pretty senior, well-established guy. I'd left Arkansas, rural practice, had screwed it up pretty much, and realized I didn't know anywhere near enough. And I wanted to go to work on the knowledge base, and I joined the faculty at the University of Colorado. I'd been there about a year or so, but I realized we didn't have the laboratory. And I started rummaging around, as young faculty do. I had no idea what I was doing. But there was something missing, and I wanted to work on it. I wanted to create a practice-based research laboratory. Well, to cut to the chase, he's about the only person in the United States that did this kind of stuff at that point in time. Found his name, called information, called him with the intention of getting his staff to just set up some time where I could call him back, and she put me on hold before I had a chance to do anything. Next thing I know, there's very quiet voices on the line. It says, hello? And I wasn't quite ready for this, but I said, well, look, I muttered something, I don't know exactly what, but for about the next 3 minutes I tried to tell him about this idea of creating a practice-based research network, and that I needed help, and I wanted him to help, and he didn't say anything. Nothing happened. So I talked a little long. Finally, about what seemed like an eternity to me, I finally said, so I need you to join this steering committee and get this thing going. He said, okay, click. And that was the beginning of what for me turned out to be a quarter of a century conversation with this man. So let me tell you the story now. Part of the context here is in Europe in the 60s they figured out that they could do surveillance by the informed clinician observer in frontline practice. We still haven't figured that out here in the United States to speak of, but the Europeans had this figured out by the mid-60s. And Curtis knew that. And Curtis bothered the CDC all the time. Right? I mean, he was there without his watch, bothering people all the time. He was working the territory down there, and we were in the midst of this national debate among the folks working on this of whether the laboratory should do surveillance or research. Were we going to just watch for things and count them and tick them off, or were we going to ask and answer questions and test hypotheses? And we couldn't get agreement about this. But Curtis was convinced that we had to at least do surveillance. He worked the CDC for a while, called up one day and said, okay, you got to be down there, and gave me the 2 days. Says, you got to get someone else from that steering committee, you got to show up at the viral division, and you got to design a influenza surveillance system based on family physicians and what they see. So Lauren Becker and I went to Atlanta. The day before we went down there, Curtis calls up and says, I'll pick you up after your meeting, taking you to Claxton, you got to see my place. And so we said, sure, we'll do that. We'll get a flight out of Savannah and go home. Now that's the setup. Here comes the story. We went to work one morning. We worked all day. We went to the head of the viral division's home for dinner, kept working. We worked till midnight. We went to the hotel and worked till 3. We got up at 6:30 and we're back at breakfast at 7:30, and we worked till 4 o'clock, and then we had a study designed and the methods and the data collection card ready to go. That was okay with the CDC folks, and we were exhausted. We went across the street. Most of my body fat's above my chin. It always has been, and if I drink 2 beers, I can lay down and go to sleep. And I had 2 beers across the street waiting for Dr. Haynes to come pick us up with Lauren. He walks in, starched white shirt, immaculate suit, driven down up from Claxton to pick us up. It's raining like heck. We get in his car, and to our surprise, in the back seat are 2 German medical students who were doing one of their rotations in Claxton. Of course, makes sense. Curtis, being the eminent host, said, you got to see Atlanta. We spent the next 2 hours with a delightful tour of Atlanta, wound up at a lovely Italian restaurant, ate a large meal of pasta, and at 5 minutes of 9, we were walking across the parking lot getting ready to go to Claxton. My friend, in quotes, Lauren Becker, and the 2 German students vanished just like that, and when I looked around, they were in the back seat. Curtis and me, front seat. It's about a 5-hour drive, as I recall it. And I'm just dead. I'm dead meat. And he's got that nice, soft, quiet voice. And he's just telling me about his ideas and stuff. We're going down the road, just fighting to stay awake here. He pulls off the road, I think in Macon. Would that make sense to you guys that know Georgia geography? It's just about midnight, and he gives me one of the most elegant 20-minute lectures of the architecture of Macon possible. I mean, that is a beautiful town. I mean, it is well lit at midnight, and it was quiet. And we're stopping in front of different buildings. Lauren Becker, 2 German medical students, they're snoring back there, you know. And Curtis and I he's discussing his preferences about the architecture there. Betty, this makes sense, doesn't it? We got to Claxton. This is a fact, buried in my brain, 5 minutes of 3. He dropped us off at what I think was a 6 to 8 room motel. He woke up, who I believe was a Pakistani attendant, and got a key, put us in that room, and at 3 o'clock as he pulled away, he says, I'll pick you up for breakfast. That was okay until he said, at 6. He picked us up at 6. We got a tour of Claxton and surrounding areas, saw the tobacco barns. He sort of scoped out the town for us. He was still in the suit. He'd finished hospital rounds by 6 a.m. That's what he'd done between 3 and 6. We then went to breakfast. What I remember about the breakfast was that the waitress ate breakfast with us. And what I remember about her conversation is that we got pretty much all the details of 3 of her 5 deliveries that Dr. Haynes had done. We then went by the public health department where a lot of his records were for a lot of his work, and where he had another complete enterprise, and where he was role-playing right then the complete bridge between primary care and public health that the country still cannot figure out and has not yet accomplished and is still struggling with. But he had it there in Evans County. Very interesting. Then he went off to see patients, and he let Lauren and me look at some of the stuff that I found around here this afternoon. Now, Betty, I may have this wrong, but I think we had to pull a desk back from somewhere around that reception area to open a trap door and go down some stairs into the basement to get to the freezers. Could that be right? They're saying that's right, yeah. So we're rummaging around. all of the walls were lined with freezers, and they were crammed full of butter beans and dirt and water and blood and other body fluids and things that we weren't quite sure what they were, and I'll never forget the guy that was down there that said, "Oh yeah, we've got a great filing system," and then over in the corner he says, "I spent 2 weeks last month trying to find that vial of blood he wanted." He's seen patients. We go upstairs, have a typical English tea time for about 10 minutes. He goes back to seeing patients. We have a flight out of Savannah at 2 o'clock. We're thinking it's about time to go. He comes out of his office at 5 of noon and says, "Let's go by the house. Got something I want to show you." We drove out to the house, lovely curved driveway, those great statues, fabulous house, beautiful place. We walk in the front door and there's something goes zipping by on the right in the living room. And there was a squirrel in the house. Curtis walks over to the front door, looks at this into the living room and says, "Well, look up there." He gnawed his way through right up there. And he slams the door shut and says, "He'll be okay in there. I've got something I want to show you." He goes upstairs, up along what I think was a curved handrail case. Did he carve that handrail himself? Did he make that? He made that staircase. He disappears in his clinic jacket up to the second floor. We're wanting to go to Savannah. He comes back down and he's got a slide projector and a Kodak carousel under his arm. He walked us into his kitchen, took the stuff off the kitchen table. There was a white tablecloth there. He pulled the thing off like this. And by the way, we had collected the German medical students again at this point. He walked over to one of these German medical students and he says, "Hold this." He unplugged the toaster. He plugged in the slide projector. And he showed us the talk he was going to give in about a week. And the opening slide, Joe, was Africa being abutted to the Georgia coast, of course. And by the way, if you want to, this was when the selenium hypotheses were running hot and heavy, and it's series 4, box 2, folder 16. I just found it on the monitor. If you want to see this stuff, this was pretty interesting stuff then. To cut to the chase, we thought we were headed for Savannah, and at about 10 of 12, he said, "Larry, we need to talk about ASPEN, the Ambulatory Sentinel Practice Network. There's a couple of things I want to ask you to do." Told the German students to take my buddy with them, and he would take me back to the practice. It's 70 minutes till plane time, we're ready to go. We did that. He got out of the car, said, "I've got to see patients at 1 o'clock, and you boys have a plane to catch." Took his keys, held them in front of this German medical, and he says, "Now you take this car here," and he says, "and you make sure they don't miss their plane." And then, I'm pretty sure I heard this right. He started whispering, but I think he said, "I don't think anyone will bother you in this car, but if they stop you, just tell them you're on an assignment for Dr. Haynes." And we went through the door of that airplane. That was before you had to go through security. They pulled it back and said, "Oh, you're Becker and Green, aren't you?" And we made that plane. And now, why did I tell you this story? Well, I want to humanize this man this afternoon. He was such a large human being. He did not see things the way the rest of us see things. Some of us are lucky if we can connect up the dots. Curtis had more dots. He knew more dots. He just didn't think like the rest of us think. And we're all the better off for it. Now, I said there's 2 reasons I was really wanted to come. The second one is I wanted to this afternoon personally verbalize my thanks in behalf of a field, a discipline, and of a people for the Medical College of Georgia, this university, this library, for pulling this collection together. If you read this month, well, now it's February, if you read the January issue of Nature and you read the current director of NIH, Zerhuni's article about what needs to happen with the research enterprise in this country, you will be reading the vision that Curtis Haynes had in 47. This is important stuff. It's going to be found. When the country finally turns right and rebalances the clinical research enterprise to get the answers that we're still missing, there are going to be scholars coming here. They're going to use this library, and they're going to be grateful to you for doing it. I want to thank you on their behalf. Thanks.
Dr. Hobbs asked me to introduce the family. My mother. Would you stand up, Mother? My wife Edwina, my daughter Buffy, her husband Roy, and my brother Chris. Okay. All this has been a hard act to follow, and I appreciate all the kind words that have been said. There's a lot of stories we can tell about my father. I'm sure some of the people from Claxton would have some real good stories to tell about him. He didn't have a concept of time, that was true. He never knew what a locked door was. He never knocked on a door. I went with him many times on calls at night, and he just opened the door, walk right in, and usually be standing in the kitchen when the patient would find out he was there. But they would always offer him something to eat. They'd sit down at the table, and that was just his personality. But there are many, many stories we could tell. But I'm here today to thank everyone. And so on behalf of my family, I would like to thank all of you for taking this time to be here today to honor my father. I know many of you knew him well and were his close friends. Thanks to the Medical College of Georgia and the Foundation for honoring him with this exhibit and manuscript collection of his papers. It is a great honor. I'm sure he's looking down on this event with a smile on his face, with a mix of humility and pride. A special thanks to the Department of Family Medicine, to Dr. Hobbs and Tollison for their support and friendship over the years, to Pam Pluckett for coordinating everything, and to Lisa Westrick for the great job she did putting it all together. I would also like to thank the people of Evans County for without their willingness to participate in the research all those years, and without their cooperation, the Evans County Heart Research Study could not have been possible. But last but not least, a special thanks to someone who was not able to be here today, Ann Beasley, his secretary for over 40 years. She ran the office, put out the fires, freed him to practice medicine and do his research. As for his papers, he often said that when he retired, he was going to write down some of his thoughts and insights that he had gained from all his years in practice and research. He felt, as often is the case in science, some of his theories may be somewhat controversial, so he was saving them for the end of his career. But for one reason or another, he was never able to put them on paper. In lieu of this, I'm sure he hoped that his papers one day would be placed in an archive such as this, so that sometime in the future, scholars or researchers will go through his papers and find research he did years ago that may need to be revisited. Quite often, I'll read about the latest in heart research, and remember, he studied that 30 years ago. He, in many ways, was ahead of his time, so there well may be some hidden pearls of wisdom and insights in his papers waiting to be found. So once again, thanks to all who had a part in giving these papers a permanent home. In closing, I will leave you with one of the many things that my father instilled in me and one of his motivating forces. He strongly believed that our payback for living this earth was to leave it a little bit better place than we found it. I think you will agree he accomplished that many times over. Thank you again for this great honor. I'm sure he is here with us today in spirit. Thank you.
Thank everybody for your attendance and your participation. Please take notice of the exhibit. There is a companion piece that sits over in the Department of Family Medicine. There will be some transportation to get you over there, probably maybe about 20 minutes into the reception that will follow next door. I want to take this opportunity to thank the family for this gift. Thank you, Kurt, for actually making it workable, because if you had not distilled some of that stuff for us to work with, I don't think that we would have been where we are today. So really thank you very much. The curator for the exhibit, where's Lisa? And I think Lisa spent a lot of time down in Claxton with you to try to put all of this together. Pam, she's already been mentioned, who's the department chair, who kind of made everything work for us from a departmental standpoint. Carla Simons, who is the person who works with me on a day-by-day basis, and she knows that I don't have a watch or clock either. But where's Carla? And that's someone that we can't work without. Really, she put all of this together. If you look at anything here, you kind of see her fingerprints on it. And I'd like to thank Phil Jones and my brother back there, who is on the video camera who's videoing this event. So thank you all. The reception to follow. Please take note of the exhibit. And yes.
I'm Charles from South Carolina. Can I make one anticlimactic remark?
You certainly can, sir.
My wife and I were in India for the Punjab, for Christian Medical College, to do a study of hypertension in the Punjabi Indians. Now, mind you that the Evans County, Georgia Heart Study had started in the 1960s, and also the Charleston Heart Study. When I got up to speak to the students, what is the first thing you think that they asked me? Can you tell us about the Evans County, Georgia Heart Study?
Thank you so very much. I am certain that there are many more stories that can be told, so please take the time in the reception to meet old friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful gift. His legacy is tremendous.
They had an interest in seeing that kind of happen in our family school system. And after she went into counseling, they didn't have the science paper.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Connell. Well, thank you so very much, sir. Hey, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Yes, we would. Yes, we certainly would. We certainly would.
Thank you.
Thank you, now. Very much. John is put into place appropriately. In fact, I actually read it to Jim to make sure that this was an accurate reflection of the way that it really was. We wanted it to be special for us. Oh, yeah.